Hello. So, yeah, I guess I was thinking a wee bit over the last couple of days about ways people learn and stuff like that. And yeah, I guess I was thinking about the variability and what could be good ways of learning or possibly easier ways of learning than others as such. And so it got me thinking, about all the different ways of learning, and yeah, so I'm going to run through them in this video. So there's about 6-7 type of ways of learning generally, and often we have a tendency to prefer one or two or three of these ways of learning, and the idea is that I guess a lot of this channel is about building your own self-awareness and building your own objective knowledge of yourself to a certain extent, where you can figure yourself out, and figure out what works for you and what makes life easier, or how you can optimize your learning and things like that. So I'm going to run through them. And basically there's a potential thunderstorm going to kick off in a minute, so I'm taking a under the forest canopy walk, but yeah, so I might just continue in a minute because I think it might chuck it down in a second. So one of the learning styles and preferences might be for certain people is through listening. Yeah, so that's listening to what people are saying. Sometimes listening to a lecture, as in being in the lecture theatre and listening to that. There's an element of sometimes listening to a room as well, so you can get the vibe of a room and listen to how everybody's interacting and what they're saying a bit, when you're in that room a bit. Also listening to podcasts or to, say, YouTube educational videos. But really listening to people is really a win-win in some ways, and there's a lot to listening. I know it doesn't sometimes seem like there is. It's just like, yeah, I'm listening to that or whatever, but actually it's like, what's the subtlety of the language? What's the differences between using that word and using a different word? What's the tone of what's being said? And how does it pull together from previous things being said? So there's a lot going on when we're listening, and it's telling a story that's sometimes not directly said. So like my missus is from like a Russian speaking culture, and kind of within that culture it's often, not always, but it seems to be sometimes that people like to say things as they are, or be very clear about what they're saying, and it can be a little bit black and white kind of in some ways, but super interesting at the same time, and I guess maybe not always, but often in the English language we like to talk all around the houses and kind of like paint a picture of the situation or the story, or hint at things. And that doesn't work well, sometimes with people from that culture, maybe. Not always, but you know. So sometimes you just have to be direct in what you're saying, you know, more. But so yeah, so listening to people is really an interesting one, and I'm a big fan of that. And what I tend to find is, personally, that I learn a lot from listening. And once I've heard a person tell their story, or in psychology, or a client say, you know, I tend to remember nearly everything about that person, you know, which is maybe an unusual, you know, quality that I kind of, you know, have, or that I've developed over time maybe. But it tends to be that, you know, I could give you the full formulation for somebody, as in all of the details of how they are and what the problems are, or the good things and all this, you know, things that are going well or not, history and everything, even if I've not seen them for ages, you know, like years. So in some ways it's noticing our strengths, and in some ways, you know, I've gone for a profession, in some ways accidentally, but other ways not, that really leverages my learning style, and also my capabilities that I might have developed as a kid for various reasons and all sorts, yeah. So there is this thing of noticing and learning about your own learning styles and your own maybe communication styles and stuff like that, which can feed into what jobs you might want to do, how you might want to skill yourself up in different areas, what you want to develop in yourself. And yeah, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't learn the other way of doing it either. It might be that you just do it slightly differently or something like that, you know, or that it's easier to do it a different way. Well, yeah, so in the past, you know, and often still, I'll use YouTube to learn new things with that listening approach, but I'll also enjoy listening to lectures, and I'll often maybe play back a lecture recording while I'm doing other work, like writing a report for work on a different subject, but I'll play back the lecture that I'd already been at, or one that I'd not been at, in the background while doing something else, you know. And so there's this aspect where you can multitask in some ways, but you're listening to that intermittently, and it tends to be that you can pick things up, or a few sentences that maybe add meaning to things, just by playing it in the background, you know. So the second one, way of learning, or preference for learning, should I say, sometimes is that visual side of things. So it might be that, like a brain storm map, or something like that, where everything's written out, or maybe a formulation, they would call it in psychology, where you look at things that are mapped together to show the maintaining factors and stuff like that, or things that reinforce the difficulty, or things that could be helpful to weaken the difficulty as such, you know. So things like a vicious flower formulation, or a virtuous flower formulation, which are both two formulation templates, can be used for many different things in psychology. So that might be an example of a visual kind of learning style, but also things like charts, different colours meaning different things, colour coding as such, and things like that. Maybe pictures and drawings, you know, like a visualization of what it is that somebody wants to do, you know. So sometimes people could, I'm guessing a technique in psychology type stuff is maybe like this goals map, or values values-based goals map or something, you know. But you can do it for all sorts of things, and it doesn't just relate to psychology. I mean, it's about learning all sorts of things, you know, but having those visual aids being making it easier, you know. Yeah, and I kind of like the visual stuff as well a lot, you know. Yeah, I'm a fan of the visual stuff and seeing, you know, different ways of looking or representing information, and looking at the bigger picture is I'm a big fan of, you know. And I guess it might link to some of the neurodiversity that I kind of have as well, or what they say I have as such, you know, with dyslexia and stuff like that, where, you know, there's this element of that taking prominence, you know, the visual stuff and the bigger picture kind of zoomed out looking at something approach, which can be enhanced with visual aids, you know, or using stuff like a mind map or a formulation type thing. So yeah, it's another one. So it's the visual learning by different visual tools, you know, makes it easier. Another one is it's kind of like the apprenticeship approach, you know, where you tend to be meant to be kind of shadowing people or watching how other people do things, and then kind of trying to put that into practice yourself, you know. So it's this kind of learning by doing something, you know, which I'm a big fan of, in the sense of I'm doing an apprenticeship at the moment in project management degree, you know, but yeah, I think I value that a lot, and I guess other people seem to at times, you know, prefer that approach. But it's that kind of thing, like, I don't really know how to do something sometimes, but then I'll give it a go anyway, you know. And also that kind of being shown by someone else that knows how to do it. So the classic thing might be somebody like not knowing how to cook a certain meal, and so they might help somebody else cook the meal and watch what they do and then try and kind of emulate that, you know. Or it might be like, you know, I used to work as a butcher. It'd be like, right, let's see how they do it and then let me have a go at it, you know. And the first few times it's not going to be a great result, as in there'll be loads of meat left on the bone, but over time getting better at stuff, you know. So that kind of learning by doing stuff, which is I think we're well up there in the kind of stakes of learning processes. This next one, learning approach, is possibly not maybe one of my favourites in some ways, but I guess it is in other ways. So there's this thing where it doesn't necessarily have to be that you're wedded to one approach, and it might be that in different circumstances different things are, you know, easier to utilise than others, you know. And so there's this aspect where, like, the next one's reading and writing, yeah? So that might be that you read something, and, you know, you might be a fan of textbooks and stuff like that. Personally, I'm not a fan of textbooks, and more often than not when I buy a textbook, it sits on the shelf and doesn't get read unless I need to write an essay or something. But what I do, which fits with this, is let me go this way, is I have a different reading approach than a lot of people, I think, where I do this kind of approach where I kind of scan the pages, and I can't really kind of quite explain how I do that, but I kind of get a feel for the page, and I kind of look at the page, and I kind of, it's kind of like my eyes flit across the sentences, picking up key words, and I kind of just scan the page. It's kind of like skim reading nearly, but yeah, it's kind of getting a feel for what's on the page and what's on the chapter. So it's this kind of like felt sense in some ways of what's there, and then focusing on little bits of it to get the bigger picture. And an example of that, I guess, was at uni when I was doing my postgrad psychotherapy. Was they gave us all, the whole class, like 25 of us or something or more, a few past reports to look at for the next 45 minutes or something. So these were like reports that had been graded highly previously, and said this is what we're kind of expecting, but you can have a look at these reports briefly in the classroom only here to see what we're kind of on about, and what we want it to look like generally. And so they give these reports out, and basically I kind of did what I do when I do that reading approach, where I kind of scanned it and kind of get a feel for it. But I kind of basically read it all 3 reports or whatever it was, in about 5 minutes or something, 5 to 10 minutes. And it kind of, they thought that was unusual, you know. And it is unusual in the sense that when I went for my dyslexia assessment, the guy said that I was a slow reader. But there's this element of a difference there, you know, where if he's saying to me in that assessment, dyslexia assessment, I want you to recall everything in this paragraph accurately, for example, then I will be slow, you know, in the sense that I'll be like really concentrating on each word and thinking about it all, and like, okay, right, and he wants me to recall all of this. And so he kind of picked it up that I was a slow reader, he thought, by like 50% slower than most. But it's a bit of nonsense in my mind, because I'm actually like, the way I tend to read is more like a scanning the page, and that's like God knows how much faster than most folks. It's like hugely faster than most folks read. But it might be that, you know, sometimes the detail might be not there, as I'm getting a feel for it, you know, kind of just like getting the information and forming the picture of what that is in a visual sense. But anyway, so reading and writing, so it might be that somebody benefits and learns things well from writing them down, and I would say I do, you know, as well sometimes if I write things down. And it might be that, you know, you write the key information that you need from a document or from a lecture, and I've always done notes and stuff, but my handwriting is terrible, and I often can't remember how to spell words, and so I'll end up using a different word, or I'll write it slightly differently because I can't remember how to spell the words and stuff, you know. But it kind of becomes a bit of like a block in my head, you know. How do I say that? Write that word, you know. But anyway, so yeah, so it's interesting. But reading and writing, I might be writing a list of the key points. It might be all sorts of things these days with the way tech is, yeah. And somebody might have a very, very much a preference for that, where they feel like they can't remember anything that's been said, and so they'd rather go through the textbook in a methodological manner and work that way. So I guess the whole idea with this video is it's about you identifying for yourself what's your preferences, but also it doesn't mean that you can't develop the skills in the other area generally if you wanted to, but it might be that it's harder, and that there's certain learning approaches or styles that make it easier for you to learn and retain information. Another learning style would be this kind of like mathematical or logical approach to things, where if the data attached to the situation is present, or if it relates to figures, then it might be, or if the situation or thing could be kind of had a focus on the kind of figures or data charts, then it might be easier for that person to pick up and make sense of that information, and it might be easier for them to understand the situation better, because they might have a more logical, data-driven approach. And once they've seen that, then it kind of sticks with them really strongly, you know. So the other one is collaboration, you know, and kind of working with other people and kind of brainstorming things as a group, making sense of it together, maybe putting a presentation together on that subject matter, or all having a piece of a report to put together and then meeting together to discuss what that's all about. And I particularly like that approach myself. I find that I listen to everybody, you see, because it's kind of like a blending of learning styles in some ways, where you might be writing some stuff down, you might be looking at visual stuff attached to it, like information, but also you're speaking and listening to everybody, yeah? And that listening to everybody and that kind of taking little ideas from everybody is invaluable, I think. And I think you can learn a lot from other people. Yeah, so it's just really reflecting. It might be a bit of reflection time for you to just think about which of these learning approaches do I find easiest in some ways, if you want to maximize your learning at any given time. So it might be you find listening to stuff is really useful and you learn stuff easier, you know. So maybe, you know, using that approach more. It might be that you find reading and writing much easier. But I think it's pretty cool sometimes, that collaboration, you know, and that working with other people on something can be invaluable, I think. But yeah, enjoy. So I made it home before it starts to strip it down heavier. I'm under the umbrella thing a wee bit, but I guess I was just thinking, there's this element of sometimes people have this difficulty where if they hear something from people that are in authority, you know, or an authority figure in their life, or anybody even, just anyone, and they hear it as an idea that something could be good to do, for example, or that might be a way of doing something, they can sometimes have this difficulty where they immediately don't want to do that thing, you know. Whatever it might be. You know, I'm just thinking of examples in my own life, you know, in my personal life as well and stuff, and it's really tough, you know, because it can prevent good things from happening, you know, and it slows down progress, and it slows down development and achievement sometimes. And it's really noticing whether or not that's something that you might do sometimes, because I think thinking about the optimum way of learning, and I've had to learn from my own experience as well, as in do something, find out it was a bad idea, and then do it again, find out it was definitely a bad idea, and then think, well, maybe I should do something different, you know, or maybe I should have listened to that person back in the day, you know, that said that. Oh yeah, I remember they said that, you know. But I would like to think that I would say I've picked stuff up from everybody I've met and really I've tended to listen to them, and then I've weighed up what they've said, and I really think about weighing that up in a lot of detail, and I'll try and cross-reference it with all sorts of different sources, and then I'll go and do my own research. And I think this key feature of learning is doing your own research, going finding out about things for yourself, figuring out if that's correct or not, or if this is correct, or was that a good bit of advice, or was that a bad bit of advice, or is that valid what they said, or is that not valid, or because there's this element where sometimes we can just accept things for what they are. And actually I've been to many a lecture where the lecturer says something that's not right, you know, and it's important to be able to test what's being said or what information you're getting, and kind of research it for yourself or reflect on it for yourself and figure out whether or not it's a good thing or not, what's being said, or where you sit on it on your view, you know. So yeah, researching things, cross-checking things, not taking everything on face value sometimes, more often than not. And I'd like to think that I've learned by all of the methods in some ways, but had to learn by experience sometimes. But in some ways it's the least efficient way of learning, is to learn by making mistakes continually, and then changing things. So there's this element of, if we can try and listen to things or research things and find out about things, and maybe, we're always going to make mistakes, but it's this element of like, is there a bit of good information that I'm getting that I could apply to things that might mean that it's more efficient, my time, or I don't have to go through this grueling ordeal as such, And there's the rain coming on heavy now. So learning in all the different forms, and also being aware that sometimes we can dismiss things or not research things, because it's often the case that if I was to say something to somebody, I would want them to go and check those things out and research it for themselves and find out the validity of it or not, and that's what I do myself. And I would just say that I went from missing a couple of years kind of school, I would say, when I was a child, a year at least, or two when we're travelling, and also missing a lot of school in the winter time and stuff because of the snow and weather every year, to getting grades still and passing things, getting my hires, going to uni first time round, then going to uni to do my mental health nursing. Studied philosophy and history the first time, but I kind of crashed out because I was unwell in the final year. And then after quite a number of years, like 3, 4, 5 years, I went back to do mental health nursing and got that under my belt. And then I did postgrad at King's College London in CBT, and now I'm doing a project management degree, and I've also done all sorts of other courses. And there's this aspect where, if we incrementally build up our knowledge and skills over a long time, we can get really good at stuff despite what our perceived capabilities are. So for example, now at uni doing project management degree, most of my essays are in my grades are in this kind of distinction level, and that definitely wasn't the case when I was at uni the first time around doing history and philosophy and politics, So there's this idea that we can incrementally get better at stuff, and it's kind of like that grit idea. If you look up the Grit TED Talk, I really empathise and kind of condone what she's saying there, that psychologist, about grit. So it's this idea of keeping going at something, incrementally working at stuff and improving stuff and learning new things all the time. To stop because it was getting really heavy, and it turned into a heavy downpour, but it's stopping again now. But there's this aspect also where, if you want to problem solve something or think something through that you're learning, it's starting again, going for a walk can often mean that you kind of make sense of it better, because you're getting the bilateral from the walk, and you're also tracking stuff, all the bilateral you get from going for a walk. But also, you can listen to bilateral stimulation music in earphones while trying to study on a quiet tone, like the drum or the bell or something like that. And it'll help you to make sense of it all, and also bring down your kind of anxiety levels as well. So yeah, bilateral stimulation or going for a walk and to make sense of something. So often I'll listen to a YouTube lecture, but go for a walk while I'm listening to it, and then I'll figure it all out, But anyway, good luck with your learning and studies.